Welcome this Sunday morning to the online church. My name is Dr. Jimmy Lamb. I'm a GP, and I'll be hosting today as we talk about mental first aid, depression, and its various aspects. We'll be focusing particularly on mood and food today. But before we begin, I just want to invite you, as our valued listeners, if you could just join me as we close our eyes and bow our heads in prayer. Dear Jesus, Lord, we just want to thank you, Lord, that today we can spend this time learning health principles from the Bible. We want to thank you that you care for us in every facet of life, physically, mentally, emotionally, spiritually. Lord, may the talk today be a blessing for those who hear. And so we just want to leave this in your hands now. We ask all this in your Son's name, Jesus Christ. Amen. Welcome again, and thank you for joining us this morning. As I said before, I am Jimmy Lamb, GP. And today we are talking about mood and food. As we think of this topic, I'm reminded of a young man I met one evening in the emergency department. Now, he was about my age. In many respects, I could identify a lot with him. And from what I can gather, he was quite a successful man. But he'd been brought into the emergency department that night by the police. Why? Because he had tried to commit suicide. And I was a little bit taken aback. Everything seemed to be going well in this person's life. Why did he do it? And so during the course of our conversation, I asked him, what happened? Why did you do this? And he shared with me a very interesting thought. He said he just did not feel that there was a purpose. He could not sense any, he didn't feel that there was any meaning in life. As he shared that thought, a Bible verse popped into my head. And this is found in Jeremiah chapter 29, verse 11, where God says, "For I know the thoughts that I think towards you, says the Lord, thoughts of peace and not of evil, to give you a future and a hope." As Victoria enters the second lockdown, as the corona cases rise up and down, I'm sure that the feelings and experience of this young man is not going to be isolated just to him. Perhaps some of you are feeling stressed and anxious because of loss of employment. Perhaps some of you are feeling stressed because of concern and worry about catching the coronavirus. Or God forbid, perhaps some of you have caught the coronavirus and are feeling really down because how it's impacting your body and how sick it's made you to be. Perhaps some of you know loved ones who have suffered from the coronavirus and have passed away. Perhaps for some of us, we are stuck at home and because of that, we're facing increased abuse at home. Perhaps some of you are in such a dark place that all you can see is darkness all around you. You can't see the light at the end of the tunnel, and you're at the point where you just want to give up and end everything. Well, I'm glad you joined us today, because what we hope to do is to show you that there is hope. And we want to encourage you that over these today and also the series of the 5 talks talking on depression between Dr. Aaron, Pastor Chris Gore and myself, that there is meaning and purpose in life. And through simple lifestyle measures, you can do things that will help either prevent depression, improve your depression, and even help you recover from depression. Now, I remember this Bible verse as well. When Jesus was here on earth, he shared with us in John 10:10, "The thief does not come except to steal and to kill and to destroy. But I have come that they might have life and that they may have it more abundantly." Jesus came to give us abundance life. And certainly, if you happen to be someone who is experiencing depression right now, this is not how he envisaged your life to be. It's really important as we talk about depression and this talk that this is, while we'll be giving you many principles that will be helpful in the management of your depression, these series of talks does not replace your regular GP. It doesn't replace your psychologist or your psychiatrist. And if you're on medications, please don't stop or change your medication dose unless under the instructions and guidance of the doctor who's directly looking after you. I would encourage for some of us, if we're living in unsafe circumstances, that if it is safe to do so and if you're able to, to try to remove yourself from the dangerous circumstance. But as I shared before, over these next 5 weeks, we hope to share with you some science-based, Bible-based principles that God has given us that will help with your mental health. And the encouraging news is that many of these factors not only help for depression, but also commonly help for anxiety as well, which commonly follows with depression. Now, for some of us, you might be asking, what is depression? Well, this is a really long-winded slide looking at that. And so this comes from the DSM-5 criteria of diagnosing depression. But the short of it is that you need to have a combination of symptoms for longer than 2 weeks, one of which should be either a persistent low mood or a persistent inability to feel joy doing things that you used to enjoy, combined with some combination of changes in weight, changes in sleep, low self-esteem, loss of energy, inattention, and recurrent thoughts of death, suicide, or the like. And that these symptoms aren't attributable to any other medical conditions, and it's having an impact on how you're functioning and on your quality of life. So if you happen to say, oh, that sounds like what I've got, and you don't yet have a diagnosis of depression, or you haven't yet sought help, that I would encourage you today, please seek help. Now, a lot of our research that we're going to be talking about today is based around what this doctor has done. His name is Dr. Neil Nedley. I would consider him one of the pioneers in lifestyle medicine and mental health. You know, he has done lots of research, but more than research, he has founded multiple community and live-in programs where he has had great success applying the principles that we'll be sharing today in treating depression and anxiety. And he has found through his research that for someone to get depression, they have to suffer 10 hits, what he calls the 10-hit hypothesis for depression. And we're just going to go through that now. These are the hits: genes, developmental, so something in the childhood, nutrition, social, toxins, circadian rhythm, so sleep, addiction, lifestyle, medical conditions that can lead to depression, and also things that impact the frontal lobe function. So these are the 10 hits of Dr. Neil Nedley's depression hypothesis. If some of you are interested, I'd encourage you to take a screenshot of that now. But this is also being recorded for those who are asking. So, you know, the brain's actually quite an amazing organ. It takes more, and it can take a lot of insults. It doesn't take one hit to get depression. It often takes 4 or more hits, 4 or more insults before it predisposes someone to having depression. And as I said before, the encouraging news is that the lifestyle interventions that address some of these hits, we know is able to improve and even help people recover from depression, and not only depression, but also anxiety as well. You know, are there any clues that we know about that can give us an idea of what we should do for a healthy living? Well, actually, there is. In the very first book of the Bible, in the account of creation, we read something very interesting. And so I'm just going to take us there now. In Genesis chapter 1, verse 27, we read, "So God created man in his own image. In the image of God, he created them. Male and female, he created them." 2 verses later, we read, "Then God said, I give you every seed-bearing plant on the face of the whole earth, and every tree that has fruit with seed in it. They will be yours for food." God made man and woman. And immediately after that, God gives the menu. You know, I think God is trying to give us a hint here that there is something very important about what we eat that has an impact on our well-being. How about the science? Well, let us have a look at that. So we know that serotonin has some link with depression. We know that many people with depression have low serotonin levels. And we know that people with depression also have lower serotonin activity within the nerve pathways that uses serotonin as its main neurotransmitter. So that's a chemical it uses for one nerve to signal to another nerve. And we also know that the greatest production of serotonin is in the frontal lobe. That's a part of the brain that's at the front of your head. Now, very interesting is that we don't eat serotonin. Serotonin is something that you produce. And it's produced in the nerves where it's needed, at the very ends where it communicates. How is it produced? From an amino acid called tryptophan. And we also know that the amount of serotonin that is produced is very dependent on how much supply of tryptophan that nerve can get. And so the key question that then it begs us to ask is, how does tryptophan get into our brains? Well, the first obvious thing is through our mouths, through our diet, how we eat. It's an essential amino acid. What that means is that this amino acid is not made by your own body. You have to eat it. But more than that, the amino acid, the tryptophan, then has to cross a barrier called the blood-brain barrier. Now, what's interesting is that tryptophan isn't the only thing trying to cross into your brain. There are other amino acids that are also trying to do the same things. And those particular 5 that compete with tryptophan for the same door to enter your brain, they are called tyrosine, valine, isoleucine, leucine, and phenylalanine. But what's really important about these 5 is that these 5 other proteins that compete with tryptophan for the same door into your brain, they are found abundantly in animal-based protein. Now, a study done by the University of Milan, they decided to compare what would happen if the ratio of tryptophan to these 5 amino acids, these other 5 that compete with tryptophan, what would happen if it was out of whack. And what they found was that those who had the lowest ratio of tryptophan, so those who had the lowest tryptophan levels compared to these other 5 amino acids, they found that these people had the greatest risk for developing depression and other mental illnesses. And so this can be summarized nicely in this picture. Meat seems to suggest, based on that study, meat leads to depression. Now, are there other studies? Because that's quite interesting. We're going to firstly have a look at something interesting. So obviously, it's important then that you want to have more tryptophan in your diet than these other 5 competing amino acids. Thankfully, some people have done research into this. And so what we're seeing here is foods that are high in tryptophan, especially compared to other amino acids. We see milk and salmon and have a 40% tryptophan compared to 60% of the 5 competing amino acids. But what's interesting is as we work our way down the list and we get higher and higher content of tryptophan, we're finding that the animal-based protein just drop out of the picture. So things that have more than 50% tryptophan would be soybeans, pumpkin seeds, tofu, almonds, and sesame seed tops out at the top of the list with 81%. So other researchers have also, and so the sources of tryptophan are basically, you can take a screenshot here of found in the things that you see in your screen right now. But what's interesting is that what is missing here is meat. There is no animal-based protein here. So, reinforcing again, if we have meat, it's likely to set some people who are predisposed to having depression. And if we have a plant-based diet, particularly high in those foods we saw before, tofu, sesame seeds, almonds, it's going to lead to a happier life. Now, other researchers wanted to see what would happen if people had a low tryptophan diet. So yes, we know it competes, but does it really translate into symptoms? And so that's what one group of researchers did. They found women who had previously suffered from depression but had fully recovered. They put them all on a low tryptophan diet. So they were checking their blood. They wanted to drop their tryptophan down by 75%, so 3/4 lower than what they were when they were healthy. And it was very interesting. When they'd done that, 2/3 of those women suffered temporary but clinically significant depressive symptoms. Now, this reminds me of a story. This is probably the earliest record of a case control prospective study ever done by mankind, and it's found in the Bible. I'll read it. please test your servants for 10 days and let them give us vegetables to eat and water to drink. Then let our appearances be examined before you, and the appearance of the young man who eat the portion of the king's delicacies. And as you see fit, so deal with your servants. You know, what's happened here is that Daniel and his 3 friends have just been captured and taken prisoners of war to the enemy country. And the enemy king, being a wise king, he wants to train up the best thinkers around him from all the nations he's conquered, take them back home, train them in a way that they will view his kingdom favorably, and send them back to their home countries to be his administrators, to govern his kingdom. And so to win their hearts over as they come, you know, they've just been POWs, they've walked a long way, they're starving. The king offers food from his table to these people. But let us continue to read. So he consented with them in this matter, and he tested them 10 days. And at the end of 10 days, their features appeared better and fatter in flesh than all the young men who ate the portions of the king's delicacies. So here, Daniel and his 3 friends decide that they won't eat the king's foods. Instead, they just want vegetables to eat and water to drink. And the outcome is that they look better. But let's have a look carefully what this says. In verse 15, it says, their features appeared better and fatter. The word features, translated in the original language, is translated from the word mare. This means sight, appearance, vision. Sometimes it's also translated as the word countenance. That is, how someone looks, their facial appearance. Now, you have to remember, they've just been through war. They've likely lost loved ones in that battle. And now they're exiled in a foreign country in an enemy land. They have no idea where the rest of their relatives, family members, or friends are, or whether they're even alive or dead, except for these 3 friends, the other 3 friends. So that's the 4 of them together. There's a lot to be miserable about. But remarkably, in just 10 days, their appearance, you know, often we say that, you know, how someone feels is reflected in their face, particularly if you've got severe depression. But their appearance was remarkably better than their fellow POWs who ate the king's rich tapestry of meats and wines and the best food that society could offer. Now, why did Daniel eat differently? Sure, we know now, you know, with modern science, that we know that, well, actually, because meat has more of the 5 competing amino acids compared to tryptophan, and so if he's on a plant-based diet, he's likely to get more tryptophan, and so therefore it's going to likely help with his mood and boost his mood. But he didn't know that in 605 BC. What he did know was from this. You see, Daniel and his 3 friends were readers of the Bible, and they remember the original diet that God had intended for man that I shared with you before. God had said, I will give you every seed-bearing plant on the face of the whole earth, and every tree that has fruit with seed in it, they will be yours for food. And so following this plant-based diet, they had a better outcome. What other neurotransmitters, what other chemicals or foods that we eat are important for our brain? Well, having a look at the neurotransmitters, dopamine and noradrenaline are other things that are really important when it comes to depression. Dopamine helps with our sense of enjoyment and being able to sense pleasure. And noradrenaline helps with focus and attention. And so these, if you have a look at this diagram, these come from a chemical called tyrosine. So where do we get tyrosine? So again, take a photo of this slide. The king here is really the green powder up the very top. Spirulina. This is talking about sources of tyrosine, milligrams per 100 grams. And you'll see there that the recommended daily intake is 875 milligrams. Spirulina, 100 grams of that, you're going to get 2.5 grams. So 2,584 milligrams of tyrosine. Firm tofu is 701 milligrams, but a cup of tofu, which is a serve, is 1,767. We see that also dried roasted soybeans fare very well. Pumpkin seeds do really well. Now, just as a comparison, have a look at our meat alternatives. Chicken is 916 and grilled beef, T-bone steak is 1,000. And this is per 100 grams. And it's dropped now, but it used to be that the serving size for meat was about 100 grams. And so what we're seeing here is per serving size, you're going to get much more tyrosine from tofu than you are from your T-bone steak. Now, anything else that's important for brains? Yes, omega-3. This is crucial for infant brain development. We know that breastfed infants who, when they're in mother's womb, so what we call in utero, if mum has had enough omega-3 then, and also afterwards in infancy, if they haven't enough omega-3, we know that their IQ will be increased compared to those who don't have enough omega-3, and that this IQ increase will last and will be reflected in their adult life. We know that decreased omega-3, interestingly, is linked to increased aggression, and that when we correct that by increasing the omega-3 in these aggressive individuals, aggression often will decrease if the omega-3 was the cause of the aggression. We also know that decreased omega-3 is linked to depression as well. And again, reversing the lack of omega-3 will fix the depression in these people. And we know that also diets which are high in omega-3 around the world have populations where they have a far lower incidence of depression. So omega-3 is important. Now, again, I'd encourage you to take a screenshot of this. What's really interesting is, what is the top source of omega-3? Well, commonly we'll hear people say, fish. But have a look at this list. Top of the list is flaxseed oil. Then let's go with foods, because not everyone will scull flaxseed oil. But chia seed, English walnuts, flaxseed, whole. These all have higher omega-3 levels than Atlantic salmon. Now, to be fair, Atlantic salmon, one serving size, at least per the Americans, should be 6 ounces. So that number should not be 1.24. It should probably be more like 2.4, right? But 2.4 still puts it lower than the English walnuts. Now, omega-3 is interesting in that it comes in different preparations. And so for health, we know that EPA and DHA are important, but these tend to come mainly from animal sources. But the only essential omega-3 variant is the alpha-linolenic acid, which is the ALA that we're seeing in that diagram there. Why? Because your body can convert ALA to DHA and the EPA. Not a lot, but it does convert it. And for those who are concerned about not enough EPA or DHA, we can actually again find it in the spirulina, which actually has lots and has one of the plant-based sources that can actually make its own DHA and EPA. So that is a good source of DHA and EPA for those who are having a whole foods plant-based diet. Now, again, this is just a summary. These are all plant, again, I encourage you to take a photo, but again, these are the plant-based sources of omega-3. And so, as I said before, walnuts, flaxseed, chia seed, these are things that sit high up. Now, folic acid is something else that we also shouldn't forget about. Folic acid is something that, when it's low, has been associated with an increased risk of depression. We know that if someone has enough folate, that it is protective against depression. Even more interesting is that people who have low folate, it predicts their poor response to antidepressants should they become depressed. In other words, if you're on antidepressants and it's not working for you, it's taking a lot longer to respond than normal, and it's happening across multiple antidepressants, then one of the things we would encourage you to check is your folate level, because maybe that's the cause of that. Just as importantly, low folic acid levels also predicts whether a patient is more likely to have a depression relapse while they're on their antidepressants. In other words, if people are on the antidepressants, it's working for their depression, and all of a sudden they deteriorate for no reason that we can find, then again, we need to check the folic acid levels. And the good news is reversing the low folic acid levels typically reverses these issues. Now, what are the sources of folic acid? Again, I get you to screenshot this page, but the top sources are chickpeas, black-eyed beans. The American call it black-eyed cowpeas, but there's black-eyed beans, lentils, lots of beans, and then further down you have other greens. But really important is what is at the bottom of the list. Meat does not rank highly. The majority of the good sources are all from plant-based sources. The other thing that's really important is also B12. And so why folate and B12 are important is because it helps with the processes that help the brain make the neurotransmitters. Low B12 is linked to depression. high B12 intake is protective against depression, and high B12 also predicts for better treatment outcomes if someone is already depressed. And again, I'll get you to take a photo of this. This is perhaps the only area where plant-based sources doesn't really offer that much. And so we're seeing that low-fat milk, squeezed cheese, and large eggs help. They've got an okay supply of omega B12 rather. But for those who are on vegan diets or whole food plant-based diet, I would encourage you to try to get it from foods fortified with B12. In Australia, the milk alternatives and certain meat replacements have B12 fortified. The brands that reliably do so, the main one is So Good. Most soy milk has B12 added, but not all almond milk does. So you really need to check the labels. But if you don't, just remember So Good. Across their range, all of them are B12 fortified. But the most reliable way is to take a supplement if you're scared you're going to forget. Other sources are red meat, or beef particularly, bluefin tuna, and clams. Now, I'll put a cross on the clams because they're filter feeders. In other words, they clean up all the rubbish and crap that's sitting around in the ocean bed or the riverbeds. And we know from science that puts most people at increased risk of infections. We're particularly thinking of hepatitis, food poisoning, but probably the most important thing is that they are biomagnifiers. What that means is that because they collect all the sediment, they'll accumulate a lot of heavy metals and other toxins in their bodies. And then we go and eat that. And so therefore, that's not really something that I would encourage you. The issue with red meat, some of you may already know, is that it increases certain types of cancers, but particularly colon cancer. And bluefin tuna, if you've seen the size of this fish, they are humongous fish. And they're also at the near the top of the food chain. And so that means they not only bioaccumulate toxins and heavy metals, but they also biomagnify, as in that all the other stuff they've eaten that have collected heavy metals, they will eat that and accumulate even more of that in them. And so for that reason, I would be really encouraging you to steer away from those last three sources of B12. Now, that leads us back, what we're seeing here is that really a whole foods plant-based diet is really the way that we should be considering going. But, as we reflect on that, as we think about this diet, there's just one more interesting study that I want you to have a look at. And this is really this is like now we're talking about frontier medicine. This is really early on, but very exciting. So what some people have found is that, the bacteria that lives in our guts seems to have a big impact on their health in lots of other areas. Does it have any impact in mental health? And so what they did was they found some super depressed people. They found some healthy people. They took their poos. They fed their respective poos to mice that had no germs at all. They were called germ-free mice. They didn't have any bacteria in them. And then after feeding them the different types of poo, they decided to see, what would happen? Very interesting. The germ-free mice that were fed poo from the very depressed people, they became depressed themselves. They exhibited depressive behavior. However, the germ-free mice that ate poo from the healthy people, they had healthy behavior. And so obviously this is an area of still ongoing research, but it's led some people to say, maybe we should just feed people or change the microbiome of people with depression, and maybe that will help. And one option is what they call fecal transplant or eating poo. Is there any other way to get over depression other than eating poo? I would hope so. But so let's ask the question, what keeps our gut microbiome healthy? Well, what we see in this diagram here is that dietary fiber and probiotics help, and anything that feeds the healthy bugs in your gut, what we call prebiotics. And that leads to a multitude of healthy outcomes. And do you know where fiber comes from and what feeds your healthy gut bacteria the best? You guessed it, plants. A whole food, plant-based diet. And so I'd just like to encourage you today as we finish this part of our segment that remember this, eat less meat. Meat is one factor, it's not the only one, remember there's 10 hits, but a significant meat eating can be a significant contributor to people feeling down. And if you're already on a whole foods plant-based diet, I would encourage you to continue, particularly remembering everything we said today, focusing on the soys, the tofus, the beans, spirulina. But if you're on this, you're setting yourself up for good mental health. Now, I'm just going to introduce our next speaker now, Pastor Chris Guo, and he'll be joining us now as he shares the next component. Just give me a few moments. So, morning, Pastor Chris.
Good morning. Can you hear me?
Yes, very
Yes, good
loud
morning.
and clear. Very good. So, look, I just wanted to, ask you. There's been a lot of people who, there's a lot of people who, when I see them who are depressed, they ask me this question. Because they're depressed and they ask, what's the cause of your depression? And not uncommonly, they'll say, I don't know why I'm here. What is the
Mm.
meaning of life? If this is all we have and we just die after that, what's the purpose? What's the point of going on? Yeah, could you share some thoughts about that?
Yes, I like to begin with this understanding. I like what you shared, Dr. Jimmy.
Oh, thank you.
Very powerful, insightful. I learned a lot from that. I like to just share something here. It's very interesting, as you pointed out. There is a recognition in the society today that depression is not a norm.
Yeah.
I just, emphasize the obvious. Nobody likes to be in depression status. I was in a depression before myself, and we all realize that this is not the norm. This is not where we're supposed to be. And not just the depression in a society, we struggle with different things. For example, if we fight with our family, our loved ones, or realize that our marriage can be better. What I'm trying to say is realize that there is a standard we in our heart we're longing for, is we call that perfect standard, or the perfect a holy one. And just use the marriage as example. My friends, even not a Christian, they like to get married in church because they have the understanding marriage is a holy. It's something you should not defile, right? It's something holy. You should supposed to be inside a church to have that, even if not a Christian. And even in our physical health, we recognize that there is an ideal, perfect, quote unquote, perfect status. This is we're supposed to be in. Depression isn't so it shouldn't be a norm for us. It's not something we should get ourselves into every single day.
Yeah,
And we
absolutely.
struggle. We have
Mm.
pain. We have sadness. We have this regret. We have whatever that causes depression, and we realize that that's not a norm. And it's interesting. When we come to Bible, then God from the beginning has created us into perfect status. If you turn with me to Bible today, I'll just share something here. People don't find the meaning of life, and sometimes it's because we forget where we come from. Because where we come from is really going to determine what's the meaning of life.
Mm.
That's the two questions associated with each other strongly. Here in the Bible, Genesis chapter 1, and God actually told us something very powerful. You look at this, is that Genesis chapter 1, verse 26 says that God said, let us make man in our image. A very simple term. Here, God said that we'll make humanity in our image. That image, it means the character of God. If allow me to use one word to summarize God's character, I will use that word love, which means that God created us to into a perfect situation that we're able to practice, experience love. And at the same time, as you pointed out in your presentation, Dr. Jimmy, that God gave us such a diet to help us to exercise love, which is the plant-based diet. And here today, I want to just give a story. I want to just go a little deeper into the story as you read in Daniel chapter 1, the story of Daniel. A person was supposed to be depressed. Why? Let's go to Daniel chapter 1 here. We look at a story. I would just want to expand on a story you mentioned. I think it's a good story to illustrate the biblical truths in there.
Yes. Yeah.
Daniel chapter 1, you're starting from verse 1 and 2, and you realize that what happened here is Daniel's hometown, the home country, was completely destroyed alongside with his family, and he was also captured as slaves to the enemy kingdom. Thinking about this, you are in a phase of your life. You are actually, if you read the Bible carefully, Daniel is coming from royal line of Jerusalem. He was someone who have a high esteem. He was in the upper class of a society. All of a sudden, everything was gone. Kingdom was destroyed, and you can have a bold guess. His parents was killed. His friends is gone. Now he was captured as a slave into Babylon. Thinking about this, if that dramatic, that catastrophic events happen to your life, would that cause depression? Many of us, yes, you will. You will cause sadness in us. What's going on in my life, and what I'm doing here for? Sometimes we live in the world, we don't feel that anymore. We live in a comparatively peace, safe environment. But for Daniel, that was something dramatic, so something catastrophic happened to him. It's supposed to cause some depression to him. But if you read through the Bible, it didn't. Might ask a question why it didn't happen to him? Because he realized that there's a purpose why God put him into Babylon. And also there's a hope he found out in the prophets of the Bible. He understands how he was created. He understands that God is able to deliver him. He reads the Bible. He understands prophecy. There's a power in the prophecy because it gave us hope. When Daniel reads the Bible, especially Jeremiah, if you have a chance, you go to Jeremiah chapter 29, verse 10 says this. The God said this to the people, said that when 70 years have been completed for Babylon, I will visit you and feel my good words to you to bring you back to this place. And this Daniel understands this. My temporal sadness, my temporal suffering, all this will end one day. Let me share this with people who had a depression before. I had it before. One thing in common for the people who experience depression is that there's no hope in them. They try. They try many things to get it better. They try many things. They lose interest in everything. They don't find a meaning in life. They don't see hope in life. Some of them is caused by a catastrophic event happened in their life, and they don't see a way out. Some of them was eaten by the guilt they had before. I remember a story was told. A girl had a depression is because when her mom was in a dying bed, and there's something going on between her and her mom, and she wasn't able to forgive her. She didn't go to visit her mom in a dying bed, and she just holding the grudges on her, and she tried to avoid her mom, even though her mom was on the dying bed. By the time as the event has come to the pass, her mom passed away without she able to see her in the last place to reconcile the relationship. And after that, she feels such a guilt in her heart. She's like, "Oh, it was my fault. I something going on between my mom and I. We were not trying to reconcile. We were not able to reconcile. And now she passed away because I kind of put her into a situation. She was so mad. She was so doing different things, and you get her to that position, and she longing for that forgiveness from her mom." And she couldn't do that anymore because her mom passed away. There's no way she can come to her mom to ask forgiveness anymore. And that guilt eating her up. She has no hope anymore. I get myself into depression the same way. Then I broke out with my previous girlfriend, and I realized that I don't have ability to love. I don't know how to handle a relationship. I did something stupid. It caused the pain of my ex-girlfriends, and I did again. And I realized that I strangely thinking that's the relationship supposed to be. But I realized that my mentality at the time, my understanding about love at the time, just caused pain to people. I have no way to go. There's nowhere to go.
Yes,
I
it's
was
so true.
depressed.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's so true what you emphasized just now that, often depression is triggers for it, as we said before, is, social support, and that is actually part of the 10 hits. And what's really important is that love, and particularly relationships, and especially when they don't go well, commonly is a source of angst and a trigger for depression in many of the people I see. So I completely agree with what you're saying. Please keep going,
Absolutely.
Pastor Chris. Yeah.
And here, but Bible has an answer. God is a God of love. He's able to
Yes.
restore us. That's why the prophecy here is telling Daniel says that I will bring you back. I will restore you. Here is very interesting. Not just restore the kingdom of Jerusalem, it's restoring the very ability for people to love again, to be the light. Because God called the whole Jewish people, the Israelites, has a purpose. What's the purpose? You can find that in Isaiah chapter 60, verse 2. It says that, for behold, darkness will cover the earth, and deep darkness the people. But the Lord will raise upon you, and his glory will appear upon you. Nations will come to your light, and kings to the brightness of your rising. Here in verse 1, Bible says that God called the Israelites, arise, shine, for your light has come. The glory of God has risen upon you. They realize that God called Israelites to become the light of the darkness. Because God says that the world, the darkness is coming to the world. People
Mm.
will lose ability how to love. I will raise you up to be the light to the people. And here is
Wow.
actually
Yeah.
Daniel is very interesting. This is the place where Daniel was in. He was in the capital of Babylon. He's in the Babylon. He's in the capital of the pagan world. There's no knowledge about God. There's no knowledge about God who is love.
Yeah.
And here he
Absolutely.
understands that God has a purpose for him.
And
He
that's
needs to
amazing.
understand love
That's right. That's amazing. And
to
so you're
shine.
saying that God gave Daniel and his people a purpose, and so therefore, when he was in Babylon, even though everything was against him, and he should have had depression because of the diet, but because also he knew what his purpose in life was, that helped him to overcome. And also he understood about love and God being a God of love. Is that correct? Is that what I'm
Yes,
hearing correct?
absolutely. And
Yeah. Oh, very
here,
good.
I just want to finish reading here in Daniel, very powerful understanding. He
Mm,
understands his identity. He is not just a slave, he is a child of God. He's a light to the darkness. And he
yeah.
want to retain the light by surrender himself to the God who is love. That's
That's
why
right.
when we come to chapter 1, verse 8, the Daniel was captured as a slave. It's a policy of Babylon that I capture your people, I'm gonna take you back to my own capital Babylon to train you, and then I'm put you back to Jerusalem, and you can manage the country for me. So
Mm,
Daniel was captured as slave to be quote unquote educated or brainwashed to in a pagan religion. And he here was offered the food, the best food you can get in Babylon, according to the world standard. Right here, Daniel chapter 1, verse 8, he uses the word very interesting. I just want to emphasize the word here today.
yep.
Daniel understanding his purpose, understanding his mission, understand God is love, and God is able to restore him one day. Here, he chose to stand in God's side to surrender to God who is love. Daniel
Wow.
chapter
Okay.
1, verse 8 says this. Daniel has made his mind that he will not, the next word is a key word, defile himself with the king's choice of food.